The story of the Palestine-Israel conflict is deeply rooted in a small but profoundly significant stretch of land in the Middle East. For centuries, this territory, known to many as the Holy Land, has been a focal point for three of the world's major religions: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. For Jewish people, it is the ancestral homeland, the land of Israel, promised to them in their sacred texts and the historic center of their faith and identity. Jerusalem, its ancient capital, holds the Western Wall, the last remnant of the Second Temple, which is the holiest site in Judaism. Understanding this deep, unbreakable connection is the first step in comprehending the Jewish claim to the land. Simultaneously, for Palestinian Arabs, both Christian and Muslim, this land is Palestine, their home for generations. They have cultivated its olive groves, built its cities, and developed a distinct culture and national identity tied intrinsically to its soil. For Muslims, Jerusalem is home to the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock, the third holiest site in Islam, where the Prophet Muhammad is believed to have ascended to heaven. The continuous presence of Arab communities over many centuries forms the basis of the Palestinian claim. This dual, overlapping attachment has made the land a cherished home for two peoples, each with a legitimate and powerful historical narrative. Before the modern political conflicts of the 20th century, these communities coexisted under the vast umbrella of the Ottoman Empire. For 400 years, from 1517 to 1917, the region was a collection of provinces within this Turkish-led Islamic empire. While societal structures were in place that often delineated communities by religion, daily life for many Jews, Christians, and Muslims involved a degree of interaction and shared existence. They lived in the same towns and cities, participated in local economies, and were all subjects of the Sultan in Istanbul. The modern concepts of statehood and national self-determination had not yet taken firm hold in the way we understand them today. This long period of Ottoman rule created a specific social and political landscape. The empire was organized into administrative districts, and the area of Palestine was not a single, unified political entity. Instead, it was divided among several districts, including the Mutasarrifat of Jerusalem. While tensions and occasional conflicts existed, they were often framed in religious or local terms, rather than as a clash between two competing national movements. The seeds of the modern conflict were sown not within the Ottoman system itself, but in the forces that would lead to its collapse and the new world order that would emerge from its ashes. The turn of the 20th century marked the beginning of the end for the Ottoman Empire, which had been in a state of gradual decline for decades, often referred to as the sick man of Europe. As its central authority weakened, nationalist ideas, inspired by movements in Europe, began to take root among the diverse ethnic and religious groups within its borders. Among Arabs, a desire for independence from Turkish rule grew, leading to the rise of Arab nationalism. This movement envisioned a unified, independent Arab state or a federation of states across the Middle East. It was a dream of self-determination, of Arabs governing themselves in their own lands after centuries of foreign control. At the same time, a different nationalist movement was gaining momentum in Europe: Zionism. This was a political ideology that advocated for the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in their ancestral land, Palestine. Spurred by centuries of persecution and rising anti-Semitism in Europe, particularly in Russia, Zionists believed that the only way to ensure the safety and cultural survival of the Jewish people was to have a sovereign state of their own. Theodor Herzl, a key founder of modern Zionism, organized the first Zionist Congress in 1897, giving a political structure to this aspiration. Jewish pioneers began immigrating to Ottoman Palestine in small but growing numbers, purchasing land and establishing agricultural communities. The outbreak of World War I, from 1914 to 1918, dramatically accelerated these trends and sealed the fate of the Ottoman Empire. Siding with the Central Powers, Germany and Austria-Hungary, the Ottomans found themselves at war with the Allied powers, which included Great Britain and France. The war in the Middle East became a crucial front. Britain, seeing an opportunity to undermine the Ottomans, sought to leverage the growing nationalist sentiments in the region. To this end, they made a series of overlapping and, in hindsight, contradictory promises to different groups, setting the stage for future conflict and misunderstanding. These wartime promises would become the source of immense bitterness. To the Arabs, Britain promised support for an independent Arab kingdom in exchange for their help in revolting against the Ottomans, a pledge outlined in the Hussein-McMahon Correspondence. Simultaneously, in the 1917 Balfour Declaration, the British government declared its support for the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine, on the condition that nothing would be done to prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities. A third agreement, the secret Sykes-Picot Agreement with France, planned to carve up the Ottoman Arab provinces between themselves, directly contradicting the promise of Arab independence. When the war ended and the Ottoman Empire collapsed, these conflicting commitments collided. With the Ottoman Empire defeated, the victorious Allied powers met to redraw the map of the world. Instead of granting independence to the former Arab provinces, the newly formed League of Nations created a system of mandates assigning European powers the responsibility of governing these territories until they were deemed ready for self-rule. In 1922, Great Britain was formally granted the mandate for Palestine. This new political arrangement placed the British in direct control of the land and its destiny, and their primary task was to implement the ambiguous terms of the Balfour Declaration. This meant facilitating Jewish immigration and the establishment of a national home, while somehow protecting the rights of the existing Arab majority. The British Mandate period, which lasted from 1922 to 1948, was characterized by escalating tensions between the Jewish and Arab communities. The two burgeoning nationalist movements now found themselves in direct competition for the same piece of territory, with Britain acting as an often unsteady arbiter. Zionist organizations worked diligently to build the institutions of a future state. They established schools, a political assembly, and a defense force, and they facilitated the purchase of land and the settlement of Jewish immigrants. This process, known as the Yishuv, created a state within a state, with a vibrant and organized Jewish community poised for independence. For the Palestinian Arabs, the situation looked very different. They saw the British Mandate as a betrayal of the promise of independence and viewed the Balfour Declaration as a colonial project that prioritized the aspirations of a foreign group over the rights of the indigenous population. They watched with growing alarm as Jewish immigration increased, fearing they would eventually be displaced and become a minority in their own homeland. Arab nationalism in Palestine crystallized in opposition to both British rule and the Zionist movement. Leaders emerged, and political organizations were formed to resist the mandate and demand national independence for a unified Arab Palestine. This clash of national aspirations inevitably led to violence. The 1920s and 30s were punctuated by riots and uprisings, most notably the Arab Revolt of 1936 to 1939. This was a sustained, nationwide rebellion by Palestinian Arabs against the British administration and its immigration policies. The British responded with harsh measures to suppress the revolt, but the conflict exposed the unviability of their dual obligations. Caught between two irreconcilable national movements, British policy wavered, at times restricting Jewish immigration to appease the Arabs and at other times cracking down on Arab resistance. The mandate was becoming unmanageable, pushing the region closer to an all-out war. By the end of World War II, Great Britain was exhausted, its empire was crumbling, and it was no longer able or willing to manage the volatile situation in Palestine. The horrors of the Holocaust in Europe had created a massive wave of Jewish refugees and generated immense international sympathy for the Zionist cause, adding urgent pressure for the creation of a Jewish state. Having failed to find a solution acceptable to both Arabs and Jews, Britain announced in 1947 that it was terminating its mandate and handing over the problem of Palestine to the newly formed United Nations. The international community was now tasked with deciding the future of the land and its two peoples. The United Nations formed a special committee, UNSCOP, to investigate the issue and propose a solution. After months of hearings and deliberations, the committee recommended partitioning Palestine into two independent states, one Arab and one Jewish. Jerusalem, given its religious significance to all three faiths, was to be placed under a special international regime. The proposed Jewish state would encompass 56% of the territory, including the coastal plain and the Negev desert. Even though Jews constituted about one-third of the population and owned less than 10% of the land, the Arab state would receive the remaining 44%, including the west bank of the Jordan River and the Gaza Strip. On November 29, 1947, the UN General Assembly voted on this partition plan, known as Resolution 181. The resolution passed with 33 votes in favor, 13 against, and 10 abstentions. The reaction from the two communities could not have been more different. The Jewish leadership, represented by the Jewish Agency, accepted the plan. While they had hoped for more territory, including all of Jerusalem, they saw the plan as a historic opportunity to achieve their long-held dream of sovereignty and a state of their own. For them, it was a compromise that offered a legal basis for independence. Celebrations erupted in Jewish communities across Palestine and around the world. The Arab states and the leadership of the Palestinian Arab community vehemently rejected the partition plan. They viewed it as a grave injustice, arguing that the United Nations had no right to grant a majority of their homeland to a minority population, which included many recent immigrants. They saw the plan as a continuation of colonial policies that ignored the principle of self-determination for the indigenous majority. The Arab League announced that it would use all means at its disposal to prevent the implementation of the plan. The vote at the UN, intended to be a solution, instead became the final trigger for a full-scale war. Section 5. The Wars That Shaped a Region, 1948, 1967, and 1973. The UN's decision to partition Palestine, immediately triggered widespread violence. As Britain began its withdrawal, civil war erupted between Jewish and Arab militias. On May 14, 1948, just the day before the British mandate officially expired, David Ben-Gurion, the head of the Jewish Agency, declared the establishment of the State of Israel. The very next day, armies from 5 neighboring Arab countries, Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq, invaded the newly declared state, officially starting the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. To Israelis, this is known as their War of Independence. But to Palestinians, it is the Nakba, or the catastrophe, as it resulted in the displacement of over 700,000 Palestinian Arabs who fled or were expelled from their homes. When the fighting ended in 1949 with a series of armistice agreements, the map looked very different from the one proposed by the UN. Israel controlled about 78% of the former Mandate territory, including West Jerusalem. The remaining 22% was divided between Jordan, which annexed the West Bank and East Jerusalem, and Egypt, which took control of the Gaza Strip. The promised independent Arab state never materialized. The war left a legacy of bitterness and a massive Palestinian refugee crisis that remains unresolved to this day. The surrounding Arab nations refused to recognize Israel, and the region settled into a tense and hostile standoff. The next major conflict erupted in June 1967. After weeks of escalating tensions, including the closure of the Straits of Tiran by Egypt to Israeli shipping, Israel launched a preemptive strike against Egypt, Syria, and Jordan. The Six-Day War, as it came to be known, was a stunning military victory for Israel. In less than a week, Israel captured the Sinai Peninsula and the Gaza Strip from Egypt, the West Bank and East Jerusalem from Jordan, and the Golan Heights from Syria. This war fundamentally reshaped the conflict. Israel was now in control of territories inhabited by over 1 million Palestinians, beginning a military occupation that continues in the West Bank to this day. In October 1973, on the Jewish holy day of Yom Kippur, Egypt and Syria launched a surprise coordinated attack on Israel, seeking to reclaim the territories they had lost in 1967. The Yom Kippur War caught Israel off guard and inflicted heavy initial losses. However, the Israeli military managed to regroup and push back the invading armies. While a military defeat for the Arab states, the war was seen as a psychological victory, as it shattered the myth of Israeli invincibility. It also created the political climate for future diplomacy, eventually leading to the Camp David Accords in 1978 and a peace treaty between Israel and Egypt, the first of its kind. Following the 1967 Six-Day War, the lives of Palestinians in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip were transformed. They found themselves living under Israeli military occupation, a reality that has now defined their existence for over half a century. Daily life became subject to Israeli military law, checkpoints, and a permit system that controls nearly every aspect of movement, from traveling to a neighboring village, to seeking medical care or attending university. For many Palestinians, the occupation means a constant presence of soldiers, restrictions on economic activity, and a persistent feeling of uncertainty and a lack of control over their own lives. A key feature of the occupation has been the construction of Israeli settlements in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. These settlements, which are considered illegal under international law, are civilian communities built on land captured in 1967. They range from small outposts to large established towns, and they are connected by a network of roads that are often restricted to Israeli use. The presence of these settlements has fragmented Palestinian territory, making the creation of a viable and contiguous Palestinian state increasingly difficult. They are a major source of friction, often leading to clashes over land, water resources, and security. The situation in the Gaza Strip has followed a different, though equally difficult, path. In 2005, Israel unilaterally withdrew its settlements and military forces from inside Gaza. However, 2 years later, after the Islamist group Hamas violently took control of the territory from the internationally recognized Palestinian Authority, Israel, along with Egypt, imposed a strict land, air, and sea blockade. This blockade severely restricts the movement of people and goods into and out of the narrow coastal enclave. Israel states the blockade is necessary for security reasons, to prevent Hamas from importing weapons and materials to build its military capabilities. The consequences of this long-term blockade have been devastating for Gaza's population of over 2 million people. Often described as the world's largest open-air prison, Gaza has suffered from soaring unemployment, a collapsed economy, and a chronic shortage of electricity, clean water, and medical supplies. The infrastructure has crumbled under the strain of the blockade and repeated rounds of conflict with Israel. For the residents of Gaza, especially its vast youth population, life is a daily struggle for basic necessities, with very limited hope for a better future or the freedom to leave. The blockade imposed on the Gaza Strip since 2007 has created a severe and ongoing humanitarian crisis, prompting numerous international efforts to challenge it. Activists and humanitarian organizations have argued that the blockade constitutes collective punishment of the civilian population, a violation of international law. In response, a coalition of pro-Palestinian groups began organizing Freedom Flotilla's fleets of ships, aiming to sail directly to Gaza's coast to deliver aid and break the naval siege. These actions were designed not only to provide material support, but also to generate global media attention and political pressure on Israel to lift the blockade. The most infamous of these attempts occurred in May 2010. A flotilla of 6 ships, organized by the Free Gaza movement and a Turkish foundation, set sail for Gaza carrying humanitarian aid and hundreds of activists. The lead ship, the Mavi Marmara, was intercepted in international waters by Israeli naval commandos. The raid turned violent, resulting in the deaths of 10 Turkish activists and injuring many others, as well as several Israeli soldiers. The incident sparked international outrage, severely damaged relations between Israel and Turkey, and led to widespread condemnation of Israel's actions, even as Israel maintained its soldiers acted in self-defense against violent resistance. Despite the deadly outcome of the 2010 flotilla, activists have continued their efforts to breach the blockade. Subsequent attempts in 2011, 2015, and 2018 were also intercepted by the Israeli Navy, but generally without the same level of lethal violence. In these cases, the ships were boarded, the activists were detained and then deported, and the cargo was confiscated. These missions, while unsuccessful in reaching Gaza, succeeded in keeping a spotlight on the blockade. They highlighted the desperation of the situation inside Gaza and the determination of international activists to challenge a policy they see as illegal and inhumane. These efforts have continued into the present day, especially in the wake of renewed conflict. In 2025, as the humanitarian situation in Gaza worsened dramatically, new flotillas were organized. For example, the ship Madeleine was intercepted in June 2025, and its crew, which included prominent figures like climate activist Greta Thunberg, was detained. Another vessel, the Conscience, was reportedly damaged by armed drones before it could even set sail. These recent events demonstrate that nearly 2 decades after the blockade began, the Freedom Flotillas remain a potent symbol of resistance and a persistent challenge to Israel's control over Gaza's access to the outside world. On October 7, 2023, the long-simmering conflict exploded into one of its most brutal and devastating chapters. Militants from Hamas, the group governing Gaza, launched a surprise large-scale attack on southern Israel. Breaking through the border fence, they swarmed into Israeli towns, kibbutzim, and a music festival, killing approximately 1,200 people, mostly civilians, and taking around 240 hostages back to Gaza. The scale and brutality of the attack shocked Israel and the world, representing the deadliest day in the country's history and a colossal failure of its renowned intelligence and security apparatus. Israel's response was swift and massive. It declared war on Hamas and launched an intense and sustained military campaign in the Gaza Strip, involving relentless airstrikes and a full-scale ground invasion. The stated goals were to destroy Hamas's military and governing capabilities and to secure the return of the hostages. The ensuing war has had a catastrophic impact on Gaza. Entire neighborhoods have been flattened, and the civilian death toll has soared into the tens of thousands, according to the Hamas-run health ministry in Gaza. The vast majority of Gaza's population has been displaced from their homes, creating an unprecedented humanitarian crisis. The war that began in late 2023 led to a deepening of the humanitarian disaster that had already been unfolding in Gaza for years. Following the attack, Israel imposed what it called a complete siege, cutting off supplies of food, water, fuel, and electricity. While some aid has since been allowed to enter, international organizations have repeatedly warned that it is nowhere near enough to meet the needs of a desperate population. Reports from 2025 indicated that large portions of the population were facing acute food shortages and starvation, pushing the enclave to the brink of famine and overwhelming its collapsed healthcare system. The conflict has also had profound regional and international repercussions. It has fueled fears of a wider war in the Middle East, with clashes between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon and attacks on shipping by Houthi rebels in Yemen. It has also deeply polarized global opinion, leading to massive pro-Palestinian protests in cities around the world and intense debates on university campuses and in political arenas. The events since October 2023 have not only added a tragic new layer to the conflict's history, but have also fundamentally altered the political landscape, leaving the prospects for a peaceful resolution more distant than ever. To look at the Palestine-Israel conflict today without understanding its history is to see only a fraction of the picture. Every act of violence, every political statement, and every diplomatic effort is laden with the weight of the past. The competing narratives of two peoples deeply attached to the same land are not just background noise, they are the very essence of the dispute. For Israelis, the memory of the Holocaust and centuries of persecution fuels a powerful need for security and a sovereign Jewish state. For Palestinians, the memory of the Nakba and decades of occupation and displacement fuels an equally powerful demand for justice, statehood, and the right of return. Ignoring this history leads to simplistic solutions that are doomed to fail. To understand why a proposed peace plan might be celebrated by one side and rejected as a betrayal by the other, one must understand the promises made and broken during the British Mandate. To grasp the significance of Jerusalem, one must appreciate its sacred importance to both faiths and national identities. To comprehend the deep-seated trauma that drives the cycle of violence, one must look at the wars of 1948 and 1967 not just as military events, but as foundational moments that shaped the collective consciousness of both societies. Understanding the past is not about choosing a side or deciding which historical claim is more valid. It is about recognizing the legitimacy of both narratives, even where they are mutually exclusive. Peace cannot be built on the denial of one people's history or identity. It requires an acknowledgement of the genuine grievances, fears, and aspirations on both sides. Empathy, which is often in short supply, can only grow from a place of knowledge. Knowing the story of the other, the story of their connection to the land, their suffering, and their dreams, is the first and perhaps most difficult step towards reconciliation. Ultimately, the path to a just and lasting peace, whether it takes the form of two states, one state, or some other configuration, will require leaders and populations on both sides to confront their shared, painful history. It will demand moving beyond the zero-sum mindset that has defined the conflict for so long, where one side's gain is perceived as the other's loss. The past does not have to be a prison, but it cannot be ignored. It is the context, the dictionary, and the map that must be read and understood by anyone who truly hopes to help build a future where both Palestinians and Israelis can live in safety, dignity, and peace.